it's difficult to catch them. Catching them requires empathy, compassion, and the courage to stand up and defend the defenseless, even when they may not deserve it. As a journalist, my hope is that I act as a stone catcher by using my voice to amplify those voices not being heard, to use my influence to highlight the conditions of those who feel powerless. Being a stone catcher means speaking softly despite the loud, brutal shouts and accusations of those around us. Being a stone catcher means being that person who stands between those who are casting stones and those who are injured by the politics of injustice, inequity, hate, and violence. So, how are you a stone catcher in your daily life? How can you catch stones so that others may live and exist in a world without injury? Again, we appreciate you joining our 2022 Martin Luther King Day celebration. The theme is being a stone catcher, learning, acting, and teaching nonviolence. It's my pleasure to introduce December Rose Waddleton. December is an author, poet, spoken word artist, and former pastor of the Restoration Center in Greenville and the Rock Worship Center in West Union. December.
There we go. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me? Just do like that. Okay. I want to thank Alicia Brewster for the invitation, and of course, Miss Carolyn Murray for allowing me to be a part of this wonderful event. Sustaining Way, My Neighbor's Voice, Atlantic Institute for this invitation, and all the people that made this happen that are working together. And I just want to shout out to stone catchers in my life who I come to know through friendship and fellowship. And that is Tracy Mulvaney and Michelle Beach, who, as an extension of their friendship, I've come to be a part of this wonderful event. So I love the idea of the interfaith conversation. I myself just identify as a believer. I don't define myself as a Christian, but I do believe in Christ. And I just want to start off with Proverbs 4:5-8, which says, "Get wisdom, get understanding, forget it not, neither decline from the words of my mouth. Forsake her not, and she shall preserve thee. Love her, and she shall keep thee." Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. Exalt her, and she shall promote thee. She shall bring thee to honor when thou dost embrace her. The late Dr. Miles Monroe spoke at a men's conference. I don't know if any of y'all know him, but I love Dr. Miles Monroe. And he spoke at a men's conference that was hosted by Bishop T.D. Jakes. And he shared this piece of wisdom with the men there. He said, a woman will never give back to you of what you give to her. She's an incubator. Whatever you give her, she's going to multiply it. She's going to give it life, and she's going to give it back. If you give a woman a house, she's going to multiply it. She's going to give it life. She's going to make it a home. If you give her groceries, she's going to multiply it. She's going to give you a meal. If you give her a word, she's going to give you a sentence, probably a paragraph. Y'all know how we like to talk. And if you give her frustration, she's going to multiply it. She's going to give you hell back. So Dr. Monroe said you can always tell what you're giving a woman by what she gives back to you. And in this season where our country is so divided, and I'm thinking about what we're giving and what we're getting back and all the stuff that's going on. But what we understand is what Dr. Martin Luther King gave, and it's still multiplying. It's still giving back that wisdom, that peace, that nonviolent movement. And now there could be a debate about whether wisdom is a woman, but we read it in the scripture, or at least I did. It said wisdom is a woman. And like every other woman, whatever you give wisdom, she multiplies it, she gives it life, she returns it to you. That's why the scripture said when you love her, she keeps you, she preserves you, she protects you. When you exalt her, she will promote you. And when you embrace her, she will bring you to a place of honor. That's what the word says. Every community, and I believe Dr. King knew this, every community is a womb, a social incubator. It will never give back to you exactly what you give to it. Whatever seed you are sown into it are multiplied and returned to the community, to the city, to the state, to the region, to the nation, and spreads beyond, to the world. And if you're wondering why we're here to get perspective. At least that's what I understand we're here for. We're here to get insight. We're here to get direction. And above all else, in all our getting, we're here to get understanding. We got people here from all kinds of backgrounds, from different countries. I saw somebody tune in from South Africa, from different cultures, from different sides of the tracks, from different social classes, if you will. And we're here to get understanding. Now, understanding is not wisdom. If they were both the same, there would be no need for the scriptures to instruct us to get both of them. Where I come from, both of them. Knowing is being informed that a thing is. Understanding is knowing why a thing is. But wisdom, that's knowing what to do with what you understand. And I see understanding is to wisdom as equality is to equity. There's levels to this. Wisdom is knowing how to use what you know, when, why, and for what purpose, to bring the root of the matter to the surface, to peel back the layers of misconception, to restore power where there is disconnection, to find proof beyond our coverage areas that we are far less different than we think. And more often than not, we're the same. But sometimes it's hard for us to hear because we can't get beyond our differences when our signals are out of range. And it costs more to understand because roaming charges are higher. Patience, grace, and compassion must expand because to whom much is given, much is required. Can you hear me now? Y'all remember that commercial that used to be, we got 2G, 3G, 4G, now we're 5G. Can you hear me now? No. I can't hear you until I see you. And I can't see you until I see God in you. And I can't see God in you until I understand that when God said, let us make man, there were no Democrats or Republicans. There were no Muslims and no Christians, no Buddhists and no Hindus, no blacks or whites, no gays or straights, no poor, no rich, no ethnicities, no race, no east side, no west side, no Confederacy or Republic, no North, no South, no kings, no subjects, no debt ceilings and no deficits, no governors and no presidents, no votes and no elections. Just reflections of God in the earth. And when you understand that, every soul has worth. Every soul has worth. And every voice has value. And while this may be true and that may be true, this is the truth. And your presence here today, your presence is proof that even where probabilities are fixed, possibilities exist to close the gap between who we are and who we can be, who we've been and who we should be, where we've been and where we could be when differences are celebrated and accepted. When ideas are considered and not rejected, when we walk about this life with God's eyes for our neighbor, when we become listeners, conductors, connectors, and celebrators of gifts, talents, passions, and dreams, when educators, facilitators, and cultivators, civilians, soldiers, civil servants, stone catchers, freedom fighters, and everyone in between come together like hot Cheetos and cream cheese. Y'all know nothing about that. Like greens and cornbread, like bagels and lox, like enchiladas and mole, like Chinese hot pot. When you pause long enough to catch the cadence of culture, you might understand the rhythm of your reality may not be mine. But equity is the universal meaning of minds. It's relationships in the present that heal the past with time. As we become incubators of love, building and earning trust, conversations become congregations like today. Ecclesia is us. As we see, we hear. As we hear, we listen. As we listen, we learn. As we learn, we grow. As we grow, we sow. And as we sow, we reap. The harvest is you. The harvest is me. And we become both the seed and the fruit of the learning tree. Thank you. That's my time. Again, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to hearing from everybody here today. And I know this is going to be a wonderful event. Thank you. And today I honor Dr. Martin Luther King with that poem, and I hope that it was a blessing to you all.
Indeed, that was a blessing. It's hard to follow the words of a great poet, a great leader, a great stone catcher, December Rose Waddleton. Thank you so much for those inspiring words. You lift us up with your words and you empower us to move forward and inspire us. So thank you so much for sharing that. And, just as we listen to the words of December Rose Waddleton, we are reminded about the importance of accelerated change. We are reminded about public discourse that has changed significantly, and the discourse that unfortunately we all know is seemingly more divisive and sometimes brutally more violent. We are so reminded in our conversation throughout this day and our time together to remember the biblical story of Jesus taking direct action by stopping that public stoning and speaking to the hearts of a woman's accusers. We are talking today about being a stone catcher and why it is so important. Being a stone catcher, by its very definition, requires reflection. It requires hard truths. It requires practice. And most importantly, it requires action. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend John Reynolds, Dr. Barbara Williams Emerson, Dr. Akil Aden, our speakers today, and those of you participating today, stone catchers, and many other history makers participating in stone catching by speaking hard truths and taking nonviolent direct action. It is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed speakers for this occasion. Dr. Barbara Williams Emerson is the daughter of civil rights and human rights icon, Reverend Hosea Williams, a close associate to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Having started as a voter registration organizer at the young age of 18, her involvement with Dr. King took her to civil rights movements and marches and protests in Georgia and Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Washington, Chicago, New York. She participated in the 1963 March on Washington and in the 1965 Selma to Montgomery March. She directed by her father, Hosea Williams. She participated, of course, in the Hosea Feed the Hungry and Homeless since her family started the dinners more than 40 years ago. She lectures nationally and internationally on the civil and human rights movement. Dr. Emerson shared with us recently that her father's comprehensive biography, Hosea Williams, A Lifetime of Defiance and Protest, was just released by the University of South Carolina Publishing. Dr. Emerson, thank you so much for being with us. Reverend John Reynolds is an accomplished author, minister, speaker, and civil rights activist, a close associate of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend Ralph Abernathy. Reverend Reynolds was instrumental in the civil rights movement. He's authored such titles as The Fight for Freedom, a memoir of my years in the civil rights movement, and continues to spend his time speaking about his experience during the movement. He's an advocate for voter rights and registration in this country. Dr. Reynolds, thank you so much for being here. Dr. Akil Aden is a founder and director of the Atlantic Institute, a nonprofit founded to bridge the gap of social interaction to promote respect and differences and commit to the common goal and common good in South Carolina. Dr. Aden received his master's degree from Florida State University and a PhD in economics from Clemson University. Dr. Aden's work and businesses are inspired by the Fethullah Gulen's philosophy of dialogue and peaceful, constructive coexistence. It is my pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Akil Aden. Once again, I remind those of you on the Zoom to please mute your microphones as we begin our discussion. It is such a pleasure to be with you. We begin our discussion with the very simple question: What does it mean to be a stone catcher? Dr. Emerson.
My understanding of a stone catcher is one who takes on the responsibility of helping others, and in one's daily life continues to be a person who stands in the gap for others when it's necessary, and comes to the plate in order to help others, in order to make a difference, not only when it is a time that is when you're called upon to do it, when the donations are sought or when the actions are sought, but also when it is those private moments when you see a need, when you see a person or a child that needs that grace, that you need to be able to stand in the gap without being called upon to do it. So it might not be the traditional definition of it, but I see it as catching the stone before it hits someone who is vulnerable, and someone who needs someone to catch that stone in order for the protection when you're not called upon, or you may not have the limelight, or you may not have the calling to do it, but you do it anyway because it's what should be done in that moment in time.
Dr. Aiden, we will now hear from you.
Okay, thanks so much, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I will take this moment to thank the organizers and director of the program, Alicia, and my colleague speakers, and everyone else participated in this wonderful event. So to answer your question, rather than defining what the stone catcher is, I would like to share my personal experience of try to play as a stone catcher this weekend. That might really explain what it is from my perspective. As you know, this weekend, unfortunately, there was a hostage taken incident at Texas synagogue. As I heard that news unfolding, my heart really beat with them. On Saturday, they are at the synagogue worshiping, being with God. And immediately, I started to pray for them. None of them get hurt, because I believe one of the ways that to catch stone is pray to the Almighty. He is the Almighty, and then He can prevent the things. And this is one of the ways that you can definitely do it. But as I kind of follow the news, and I also, learn about the details, and unfortunately, the suspect was so-called Muslim, who in fact follows the same faith tradition that I belong to. That really, even though hurt more me personally, because seeing a Muslim try to hurt the believers who got together to worship God is, to me, cannot be understood at all. I cannot accept at all. So that at that point, I kind of increased my prayers for those people, even though I said, oh God, please, none of them get hurt, not get harmed. And so it was as if I was part of that incident, and feeling that one with them, even though I'm a Muslim, they are Jews, but it doesn't matter. As Ms. Rose beautifully indicated, we are all human beings. That is what it is. And then I try to really catch the stone with my prayers for my Jews brothers and sisters over there. And I was so relieved when I heard that none of them was harmed. I think this is one of the ways that you can catch stone, and not necessarily to catch stone for your own people, for your own tribe of the culture or the faith, and do for everyone else. So I think that's important aspect of our actions, that could be sometime in the form of prayer, sometime in the form of writing a message, sometime in the form of speaking up, sometime as Dr. King did, to really organize people in nonviolent actions to take on the street to raise the voices of the voiceless.
Thank you, Dr. Aiden. Reverend Reynolds, I believe we are able to hear you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm delighted to be here this morning. And first of all, I'd like to just thank you for the work that you do and your commitment and passion for telling the truth.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Reverend Reynolds.
If I might, I'd like to set the background here with Jesus. John 7, verse 56, and John chapter 8, verses 11, basically find Jesus outside of the temple, and he is confronted by the Sadducees and Pharisees. And they bring this woman before him. Target is not the woman. The target is Jesus. But they bring this woman and says she was caught in adultery. She was caught in adultery. But my question, where is the man who was involved in this adultery? So Jesus is about to commit civil disobedience. What Jesus does, he stands aside from the woman and nailed down on the ground. Several things is happening. He is forcing these men to look at this woman. But Jesus is unwilling to participate in that. And that's the reason that he is bent down on the ground. That's the reason that he writes on the ground. It's not important to us what he writes on the ground, that you see that he is committing civil disobedience. I'm not going to participate with you. And he raised one question to them. The first one without sin, throw the first stone. Jesus is about to change the landscape for you and me. So by being on the ground, this woman who have been condemned is clearly visible to them. Jesus stays on the ground and he asks the woman one question. Have they stoned you yet? And her answer is very unique. She says, no, they all have gone. And Jesus says to the woman, go and be free. Live your life as a free woman and not a condemned one. And so that's our clue in terms of how we should live in our life personally, but also to make change in the world. Because it's not about you, it's about the other. And when I used to train people in the South and the way I was taught, that you try to protect the person who was being stoned, that you surrounded them and put your body in front of them in order to protect and cause no harm. That's the scenery. So I stop there and respond to other questions.
Thank you, Reverend Reynolds, and thank you, Dr. Emerson. Thank you, Dr. Aiden, for your words that certainly set the tone for today's conversation. I am sure all listening and watching are already moved and inspired. Because you were firsthand witnesses, and we all are firsthand witnesses to discrimination, how do you push back on fear and anger and instead show love and compassion? For anyone who wants to respond.
Well, Carolyn, I think one of the things is learning what your gifts are and how you use those gifts to be the light of the other, to be the voice. And so with me, I grew up on a plantation and saw some awesome things. But when Dr. King decided to hire me, he asked me, "Are you willing to die?" And my answer, yes. And I understood at that very moment that it was not about me, that I was joining something much larger than myself. So I had to say, John, get rid of this anger that's in you, and I think that's what you have to do when you think about other folks.
I think it also is a matter of being encouraged and being with like-minded people, because when your anger is isolated, it's easier for it to be consuming. But in our case, what John and I and others who were in the civil rights movement, we were amongst others who were determined to make a change in the circumstances we were living under. When I started joining demonstrations, I was actually 15 years old, and I had experienced segregation, but not nearly to the extent of many others, because I had been brought up in an environment where you could skirt around it. We were able to, because of class, being middle-class children, go to parochial schools. We knew where not to go in Atlanta to come into contact with racist people. And they were people who we were taught were people who had ugly ways. And it was sort of, we were protected. So we didn't have to come up against the hardcore racism that people before us and people who did not have our privileges were able to, had to come up against. But we knew that there was an injustice that was there, and there was an anger still. But being amongst people who were like-minded and who had been trained in nonviolence, it made it more able for you to channel that anger. Being around someone like John, who had grown up on a plantation, as opposed to myself, who had grown up around de facto segregation in the North, it made it easier to channel it into a positive way, because you would say, well, if this person can do that, woe, the shame on me if I can't follow in a nonviolent path. For instance, my father had experiences that he would tell us about, where he literally had fought in World War II and come back home. And while he was on the way home in uniform and injured, and it's described in many forms, but it's also in this book, which I'm going to do a shameless plug, which I would like for you all to get a copy of, because there's so many instances in here of how nonviolence works as a strategy, and also of many instances of how the stone catcher works. It came out week before last on his birthday, his 96th birthday. And he was someone who he was not a nonviolent man by nature, because of the many experiences that he had of nonviolence, of violence in his life. But he was able to go from being a veteran who was beat nearly to death, to the point of where they thought he was dead, for getting a drink of water while in uniform to take medication for the injuries that he had sustained while in the war, on his way home as a wounded veteran, for drinking from a white water fountain and laying in a hospital bed thinking that he had fought on the wrong side, from fighting in that kind of war using violence, to a soldier in another kind of war where nonviolence became the weapon, where he was a lieutenant for Martin Luther King and led strategic movements that were responsible for the passage of the Voting Rights Act in Selma, and for the 1964 Civil Rights Act, for the movement that he helped to lead in St. Augustine, which was a completely different approach of using nonviolence as a strategy. But he was able to use his anger and use his as a determination to make change. As a matter of fact, he said, when I recall him saying that when Martin Luther, he said that he did not feel that Martin Luther King was a god, but that he met God when he met Martin Luther King. And that he took that as Martin Luther King's teachings of nonviolence as a tactical strategy, more so than a philosophy, than a personal philosophy, because he had already experienced so much violence in his life that it became a tactical philosophy. But when Martin Luther King was assassinated and murdered, his very thought was that and these were his words, he was a chemist by training and education, but he wanted to take molecules from the air and create a gun to shoot every white person in sight. That was his response, his gut response to the murder of Martin Luther King by a white man. So he fell back on his natural instinct of meeting violence with violence. But what kept him from going to violence was the ingrained teachings of Martin Luther King, because he said he could hear Dr. King saying, "No, Jose, that's not what I would want you to do." So you're able to, when you've been trained in nonviolence, you're able to call upon that reserve of teaching, even in the most trying of times, because it is something that you have to learn to internalize as a flashpoint of coming to yourself, as a way to be able to respond, because those situations will continue to come up. They still come up. The microaggressions that we come as African Americans, as people of color, that we come across every day in our own individual lives, as well as the horrendous things that still happen to people, are enough in 2022 to evoke violent responses. And one has to simply be mature, adult, human enough to call upon one's humanity in order to respond in a nonviolent way. So it's not an easy road to travel.
Carolyn, I would like to add to Dr. Emerson and Reverend Reynolds with a story from Prophet Muhammad. There was a time when he was passing by people wrestling, and the people said, "O Messenger of God, this is a wrestler and no one can wrestle like him." And the Prophet said, "Shall I tell you who is even stronger than him? It is a man wronged by another man, yet he suppresses his rage, and thus he defeats it. He defeats his own evil, and he defeats the evil of his companion." This is a very authentic and famous story among the Muslims, to remind themselves being strong, not being physically strong and wrestle and defeat everyone. And in the time that someone wrongs to you and you build the rage, but you are able to swallow that one and be patient and understand that the best way to respond is in the form of compassion and in the form of forgiveness. And that is when you truly defeat your companion and help your companion to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aiden. Dr. Emerson, Dr. Reynolds, specifically, because the two of you were so young when you were watching the experiences of your parents and hearing their stories of being discriminated against. I'm wondering, and Dr. Emerson, you mentioned maturity, that being a factor in how you move forward. So how do you explain to someone how you develop that skill, that ability, the knowledge to become a stone catcher and to look beyond the abuse that you feel at the moment to show compassion to someone who has assaulted you?
It was actually quite remarkable when you think of it, that the youthfulness of the workers in the civil rights movement. When you think of the fact, for instance, that Dr. King was 38 years old when he was assassinated. My father is in terms of the executive staff, he was in his early 40s and he was the old man on the executive staff. But most of the front line, the boots on the ground folks were people like John who were in there. I mean, I was specifically very young. I was 15, but I didn't really have a choice being Jose's daughter. And I don't think I would have made another choice. But the young people who were the soldiers, the foot soldiers, there was Richard Smiley was on here. I don't know if he still is, but Richard was only a couple of years older than I was, and he was one of the staff members, and many of them were in their early 20s. And these were people who I think they were right for the job because they were old enough to understand the need for the change, but they weren't so old that they had a lot at stake to lose. And the maturity came very quickly. It's like being in the Army. They say you send a young man to the Army, he matures very quickly. You put a young person, the project that John is the chair of the SCOPE project, which stands for the Summer Community Organization and Political Education Project, was 1,000 college students from Northern and West Coast colleges who came down, predominantly white students who came down to do voter registration and political education during the summer of '65 in anticipation of passage of the Voting Rights Act. When you are put in a situation where you are convinced, or people convince you and teach you that this is a life and death situation, you mature real fast. You know, when you understand the severity of what's at stake and the seriousness of what you are doing, you mature quickly. So I think it was the circumstances that made us reach a level of maturity that was beyond our years. Now, in general, the maturity that it takes to take on the challenge of being a stone catcher, that's a different situation. That I think comes through teaching on a more individual level of what's taught in the home and what's taught in the school. And when we teach young people responsibility and I am my brother's keeper, but the maturity that we experienced, it was the situation of being literally on a war field and there was no turning back. So once you're out there, you get it. It's also like becoming a mother at an early age. You mature real quickly when that baby comes because you have to.
I also want to ask this question because our time is running short, and we know that we certainly want to get to our individual discussion groups, but how important is faith when we are talking about being or becoming a stone catcher? Can someone become a stone catcher if they are not rooted in a spiritual community? So how important is that?
I can jump to this one first, Carolyn, if you like. I think in terms of the faith, I'm sure that this is common for all faith traditions, because so far, whomever I have interacted from different faith traditions, I see a very similar recommendation versus traditions. So particularly in my own tradition in Islam, there's a wonderful, strong message from the Prophet Muhammad is giving the message of being for every Muslim be a stone catcher. And then he tells whoever amongst you sees an evil, he must change it with his hand. And the first thing that Prophet Muhammad recommends to take action physically, try to really prevent an evil. And if he is not able to, or she is not able to do so, then with his tongue, as we speak today. And if that's not the possibility, if he is not able to do so, then with his heart. And that is the weakest form of faith. So in fact, Prophet Muhammad puts the faith connection with action and makes that the weakest point of the faith is when you hate from your heart, because you are not able to do anything with your hand, with your mouth. And so therefore, there's a very strong connection of faith with action and being stone catcher. And I think what I tried to do on the weekend, because I was not able to do anything with my hand, maybe with my tongue, therefore I tried to use my heart to be stone catcher. That was not the best option, but maybe that was the only option I had it. So the same thing applies, I think, to everyone. And the faith and the Islamic tradition especially is highly promoting for its followers and for its believers to be active and to defend the others and to be against the evil and wrongdoing.
Thank you, Dr. Aiden. And I believe what Dr. Aiden is talking about is hope, Reverend Reynolds, pardon me. And Reverend Reynolds, in your response, if you could also talk about, there is a quote from Brian Stevenson, the lawyer and equal justice advocate, and he says, "Injustice prevails where hopelessness persists." And he's talking about hope. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the importance of making sure that people understand the value and importance of being hopeful about moving forward.
Yes. Thank you. That's a very good point. As I mentioned a little earlier, I grew up on a plantation, and therefore I saw a lot of different things happening. One of the images for me was a January day, and my grandmother was washing clothes in a bathtub, and her hands was filled with ice. And I said to myself at that moment, that I cannot just sit and watch my grandmother, but I had to take the stones from her. One of the things, my grandmother was not able to go to a restaurant in her entire life and sit down and have a decent meal. She had to go to the back of restaurant and order through the little box that they handed you. And I said, I'm not gonna let this stand. So every time that I go home now, the first thing that I do is go and sit for my grandmother who couldn't sit. So those early moments in my life gave me the strength, the will, if you will, to do something. Sometimes we get so caught in ourselves that we can't see beyond ourselves. I went and registered in school in September like all of the other kids. But because I lived on a plantation and I had to help my mother put food on the table, was a huge thing for me. And I went to a segregated school. And if I was lucky, maybe in February, that I will be able to go to school, or if it rained. So that was my journey. I didn't have time, if you will, for foolishness. When my father almost beat me to death because I joined the movement in my hometown, I had to be open to other things. And one of the things that I wish young people would do is listen to themselves for a while. Learn who you are. Learn what your gifts are. It's hugely important that you talk to yourself. See, if I hadn't been open, I wouldn't have let this white man in my life who became my second father up until he died a month ago. So anger and hate destroys yourself. Hate and anger keep you stuck. And one of the things that I try to say to young people today, don't let your circumstances destroy your gifts. And in order to learn what your gifts are, you have to listen to yourself and be open to what's coming to you from outside. And that's what nonviolence is all about.
Thank you, Reverend Reynolds, for that. Thank you so
Can
much,
I just-
Dr. Emerson. And thank you, Dr. Aiden. As our time is winding down, I have one final thought that I'd like you to express your views on. And it is doing the right thing, even when the right thing is hard. And I think that's something that each of us faces in our daily lives. So how do we accept that the person who might be of a different political party, a different race, gender, socioeconomic class, how do we accept that each person is more than the worst thing they have ever done? How do we become even stronger stone catchers?
Can anybody answer this?
Yes, December, if you would like to answer, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Well, I'm gonna answer my thoughts on this question, and I'm gonna combine all the last three questions. I really liked what Brother Aiden said when he gave an excerpt of, I will call it scripture, but it reminded me of something in Matthew. And although I don't, the question you asked before was, how can you do this without being a part of a faith community? I'm of this persuasion that love is so grand and so great that it transcends organized religion and institutional religion and that kind of thing, that if you operate in love on any level, you're part of a faith community. I think when we think of the words faith community, we think of church or some kind of denomination or something like that. But on the back of what Brother Aiden said, I want to read something real quick, and I'm gonna try not to preach a sermon. I'm subject, but I'm gonna try not to do that. In Matthew 25, verse 31, it starts off, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. And I just want to say this real quick before I finish reading. It's so awesome that between the Quran, the Bible, and all these other, there's so much that crosses over, and you're going to see what I'm saying. Verse 32, it says, all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And this is verse 34. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger or invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. And that scripture reminds me of what Brother Aiden was saying, and that's the basic faith. If you're able to look beyond yourself and do anything for anyone, you are part of a community of faith. Even if you call yourself an atheist or agnostic, I've only recently shed the label of Christian. I was a pastor of 2 Christian churches up until December of 2020. And I only recently shed that label, not because I don't believe in Christ, just because I love God too much to call myself a Christian, because I saw Christians storming the Capitol, and I saw Christians lighting crosses on fire, and I saw Christians trying to send the LGBTQ community to hell, and I saw Christians trying to condemn a young lady who raped and wanted to get an abortion, and the term and the label was too small to encompass what I believe in God and how I love people, and I couldn't associate myself with that label. But I'm a firm believer in Christ. So when you say, well, how can you do this without being part of a faith community? If I love my brother, I'm part of a faith community. If I feed my brother, I'm part of the faith community. If I give my brother or sister a piece of bread or a coat, I'm part of the faith community. If I give my brother or sister an encouraging word, I'm part of the faith community. And love is so big. It's so big. You know, it's so grand. It transcends religion. It's so big and so grand that it offends religious people most of the time. But Christ said, one thing that Martin Luther King said, and I'm going to be done talking and preaching, I guess, that answers to this, my answer to the question is, first, Martin Luther King, I'll start with him. He said, one of his quotes that I like so much, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And then the scriptures, and this is something that transcends Christianity, you know, this you could find this foundation in every single religion there is. But the one that I have my base and foundation in is the Bible and the faith of Christ. So that's where I start. But it says in John 13:31, and I'm going to be done preaching. He says, so when he got out, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and glorify him immediately. This is the important part. It says, little children, I shall be with you a little while longer. You will seek me. And as I said to the Jews, where I'm going, you cannot come. So now I say to you, this is the important part. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. And that's just really the bottom line for me. And the answer to all these questions. Love is so big, it's so awesome, it's so grand that it answers all these questions for me and to me. And that's all I have to say about that.
Well said. Well said. That is the community of love. And if we could get less than 1 minute in response, Dr. Emerson, Dr. Aiden, and Reverend Reynolds. Thank you. 1 minute so that we can then go to our group discussions, as our time is again running very short, but what an incredible conversation. Dr. Emerson, we begin with you, please. Thank you.
Yes. In celebration of Martin Luther King Day, everyone knows he said, "I have a dream." But the night before he was assassinated, he said that what he wanted to be remembered for was that he fed the hungry and clothed the naked. And in that light, Hosea Williams started 50 years ago, Hosea Feed the Hungry, which is now Hosea Helps. And as we speak, we have volunteers that are in my family, and we are doing our annual Martin Luther King Day event, and we're feeding the hungry, and by drive-through, as we have to do it now, and by delivery to homeless camps. And that is my definition of stone catchers. There are still people out there who need our help, even on the basic level of providing food. And we do it as Hosea Helps, but we are actually the Martin Luther King People's Church of Love doing business as Hosea Helps.
Dr. King also said that nonviolence is all about the love ethics of Jesus. He says that nonviolence is not the method for cowards because it doesn't resist. Nonviolence does not seek to defeat or humiliate your opponent, but instead to seek to win his friendship and understanding. It is through nonviolent cooperation and boycotting that nonviolent is direct against the force of evil, rather than those who happen to be doing evil.
I'll take to Reverend Reynolds.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll take to conclude my maybe comments with a personal, very short story, then not a personal experience, I will say. Recently, about 2 weeks ago, I had my fourth baby boy to came our family. I was in the hospital for a week because he had some respiratory problem. Going there twice a day, my wife was pumping the milk. I was taking to him, and in the NICU room, there were about 10 more other babies. When I look at all those babies, like in the morning and in the evening, I kind of found all of them like my babies, because there was really not much different between them. So they were all very innocent, human being, pure. So then I was kind of really taking a moment to reflect on them. How do we turn from that beautiful, innocent nature to be violent sometimes? So then I was kind of pushing myself. Akif, remember when you are out of this room, those babies, remember those babies, and remember that all of the people were at some point were like those babies. And at that point, you will remember their true nature, their innocent nature, their pure nature, and you will have compassion and love towards them. I think if we remember this nature of humanity, we all have a tremendous potential of love and compassion. The only thing we need to struggle to reveal and make it dominant to our life. And at that point, we'll be able to really be very inclusive and to be able to embrace everyone, regardless of their cultures, race, religion, and we'll love them. And that will also save ourselves from our evil nature. That's the only, I think, the solution that we can move forward in peaceful nature. So also just, I think that another very common principles between the different traditions, no one in the sum, it's kind of put in this way that none of you truly believes until you wishes for your brother what you wish for yourself. That's kind of to the sense of empathy is also another very important factor moving forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Barbara Emerson. Thank you, Reverend John Reynolds. Thank you, Dr. Akif Aden, for your comments. So inspired. Of course, we wish that we could spend much more time in this part of our conversation, but it is my pleasure at this moment to introduce Victoria Chance, co-founder of My Neighbor's Voice, a nonprofit that facilitates healthy dialogue within communities. Victoria recently said the challenge for stone catchers, those folks who would catch the stones that others intentionally throw at the vulnerable, is not to throw those stones back. When someone throws a stone at anyone, that person is disconnected from their own humanity. And that is certainly what our speakers have shared with us today. Victoria will instruct you as we begin our small group dialogue, as we move into our session where we will open up the dialogue, and then again, we will return at the end of the program for a final announcements and thank yous and closing remarks from Alicia. Victoria?
Now I'm here. Moderators, what we're going to do, everyone, is you're going to be assigned to a breakout session, and there will be a moderator in that session. The moderator will not share a screen. Instead, we will all first introduce ourselves to one another. And then, if you will, please address this question. And it is, we think about listening as a loving act. And December Rose certainly told us about love and its practicality. But once you get to your breakout room, if you will answer the question, how is it in your world you are practicing stone catching? And if you will share that with your group, and then in about probably 7 minutes-ish, we will all come back for a wrap up. And at that time, you will hear more about the organization and our work with My Neighbor's Voice. So moderators, if you'll keep a time on your phone, if you can, say 2 minutes, and we'll meet back in just a moment.
Hi, Sylvia. Did you lose your room? Were you in a room, Sylvia? Hi, Sylvia. Can you hear me? I can't hear you.
Unmute. Okay, can you hear me now?
Did you lose your room?
Yeah, I'm in room 7.
Well, I'm about to close the rooms, but I can quickly assign you.
Okay. Throw me in.
I'll do my best.
I'm gonna see if I can get back on through my
Go ahead.
internet.
Miss Murray, I didn't give you a chance to say anything.
No, I've said enough. Thank
I'm
you.
so sorry. And we
You
could
know,
we
I've
had
said
we
enough.
had
Thank
30
you.
seconds we could have. I've just
Absolutely.
enjoyed you
No,
so much.
please. I think
And
it was absolutely, it was perfect what happened. Thank you. Okay. I believe everyone has returned, and I certainly hope you enjoyed your breakout sessions. Ours was certainly, once again, very inspiring. I could spend the rest of this day with the people participating in this conversation. It has been really the way that I believe we should spend the day that we celebrate the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as well as other stone catchers in our community. I have learned so much. I am so uplifted by what we have shared. It is my pleasure to thank our participating partners, my neighbor's voice, the South Carolina Poor People's Campaign, Sustaining Way, South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, Atlantic Institute, and of course, Scope 50. Thank each of you for participating in today's discussion. I believe that we've all learned more about what it means to be a stone catcher. We live during a time when people are always prepared to blame and point fingers at the other side. everyone sees the sin and irrationality and ill will of the person on the other side. As we discussed at the beginning of our program today, it is important that each of us act as stone catchers to show compassion and unconditional love to even the worst offender. I apologize for the barking of my dog in the background. He too was intrigued by today's discussion, and I think that he too may have learned today a little bit about being a stone catcher. Mike, the group gives you a thumbs up, so thank you for that. It is my pleasure now to introduce Alicia Evans, who is responsible for bringing us together today. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. Blessings to each of you. Alicia.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Reverend Reynolds, Dr. Emerson, Dr. Aiden, and December Rose, and all of our partners and neighbors from across the state and beyond. At this time, I'm going to invite, I believe, Mary Ann up first to talk about My Neighbor's Voice, and then we'll just go one partner organization at a time to give a little wrap up, and then we'll close out.
Thank you very much, Alicia. It's just been a pleasure for My Neighbor's Voice to be a part of this today, of this wonderful event. And we invite all of you to come back, go to our website and look at what we have going on and join us in our endeavor. Our group focuses on listening as a way of building community and making us all stronger as a result. And it was wonderful to listen to everyone this morning and to also to hear about how others in our community are being stone catchers. So thank you for this time.
Thank you. And we will have, if South Carolina Poor People's Campaign is here, if you will share about your organization, and we'll just go in the order that's listed on the screen. South Carolina Poor People's Campaign, and then it'd be Atlantic Institute, Scope 50, and Sustaining Way. We will go.
I think Kieran is having a hard time with his recording audio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we will come back to the Poor People's Campaign. Let's go to the Atlantic Institute.
Hi, yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much to everybody that was here in attendance. The Atlantic Institute was proud to partner with all of the fellow organizations today. We work on building bridges of dialogue between people from different backgrounds, cultures, faiths, education levels, understandings, all sorts of different backgrounds that you might have. And we work on building bridges through dialogue. We have events that we are doing primarily now on Zoom with the way COVID has been the past 2 years, that we have people from all over the world joining us for them. If you go to our website, it's atlanticinstitutesc.org. You can join our mailing list and join us for some of our insightful dialogue talks. Our next one is the 27th at 7:15, and it's a discussion I'm holding on finding common ground between those of us that don't have any.
Reverend Reynolds, I believe you're up next.
If he's John's, I don't see him on here, but I can speak a little bit for Scope 50. Scope 50 is the 50th anniversary group of the Summer Community Organization and Political Education Project, which was the 1965 group of 1,000 students that SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was the organization that Dr. King was the president of, brought to the South to do voter registration and political education. John was a member of that project, as was I, and Dr. King commissioned Hosea Williams to direct that project. And these students were deployed throughout the South to prepare people to be ready to register to vote once the Voting Rights Act was passed. And we came together in a reunion 50 years later. And John has been the chair of our board. I serve on that board as well. And we've continued to do voter registration and voter education as a group since then, since the 50th anniversary, which of course would have been 2015.
And Sustaining Way.
Hi, my name is Oscar Bennett. I'm the engagement coordinator here at Sustaining Way. Our mission is to use education, collaboration, advocacy to create a more caring and sustainable environment, or caring and sustainable community for current and future generations. As far as connecting Sustaining Way to stone catchers, I was just talking in our small group that I feel like that is Sustaining Way's goal, to find and uplift current stone catchers, give them the skills to go out and be all that they can be. You can go on our website, sustainingway.org, to find out more information about us. We usually have a monthly open house where we talk about different topics within our Nicholtown community area. We are a local hub for Nicholtown community, and then we scope out greater beyond Greenville. But we really like to have you all come on our site, visit our demonstration site, and learn more about us, and and interact, to help build a better future for all of us.
Thank you all for giving us a little bit of information about your organizations. I'll just share a little bit about the Poor People's Campaign. It's a national call for more revival, and it is uniting people across South Carolina to challenge the evils of systemic racism, poverty, the war economy, ecological devastation, and the nation's distorted morality of religious nationalism. And this is the work that Dr. Martin Luther King began. And I will close with talking a little bit more about South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. So similar to this event, South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light throughout the year brings together faith communities, government, nonprofit agencies, environmental and grassroots community groups to respond to climate change and to care for the earth and all of its inhabitants. One way that you can stay involved this year is by joining us virtually on January 20th, so this Thursday, as we launch a year of resilient creation and restored communities, voting for climate justice in 2022. Our speakers include Corinna Gore, who's the founder and executive director of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary in New York, Dr. Randy Woodley, who's distinguished professor of faith and culture at Portland Seminary and a Cherokee descendant, Reverend Emmanuel Duncan, who's senior pastor of Gethsemane Baptist Church in Greenville and the co-chair of the Greenville Interfaith Justice Ministry, Reverend Lennox Yearwood, president and CEO of the Hip Hop Caucus and a community activist, and Reverend Adam Taylor, who's president of Sojourners and author of A More Perfect Union, a new vision for building the beloved community. Additionally, we invite you and other stone catchers to apply for the Faith Leaders Civic Engagement Academy Cohort 3. We launched this last January, and topics include building a foundational understanding of policy, politics, and advocacy. Participants learn about elected officials, advocacy basics, and participate in practical application in areas such as clean energy, conservation, environmental justice, and other areas of community concern. In addition to virtual training, because of COVID, all of our training and educational opportunities are mainly virtual. But this year, participants hopefully will also be able to participate in a day of conservation advocacy in person at the State House this spring. And you'll get an opportunity to work on a pressing issue in your community. In closing, South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light just celebrated a decade since its founding at Wofford College in 2011. Dr. King's last book, entitled Where Do We Go From Here?, reminds us that it's very important to intentionally assess where we are and to continue in the faithful action and hope that mass nonviolent action and the ballot will continue to advance the beloved community. You will also receive a final message from Eventbrite requesting your participation in a survey to provide feedback to South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light and all of our partner organizations about this event, as well as about the organization South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. And finally, we invite you to go to our website, scipl.org, to register for all of our upcoming events, and to please do go, if you'd like, to make a one-time or recurring donation to support our continued work of engaging people of faith to work together for a just and sustainable future. And I really appreciate all of the comments, all of the wisdom that was shared today. As was shared by Dr. Emerson, Dr. King would want us to remember that by feeding the hungry and clothing the naked, that we in fact are doing the same for Jesus and for all of humanity. So thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you will join us for one of our upcoming events and that you'll stay connected with South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light and all of our wonderful partners. Be blessed.